Hello. This is a paper which I wrote concerning architecture, identifying historic, pioneer, folk Southern architecture. When thinking about Southern American architecture, many people instantly flash upon Tara, the Greek Revival columned home immortalized in the movie Gone with the Wind. More recently, however, middle and lower class historic dwellings have been gaining attention and being acknowledged as worthy of study. Although Northern American folk architecture was appreciated much earlier, Southern architecture had to undergo a renaissance between the early 1970s and today. The first step towards studying these buildings is identification. Even when no building exists, such as in the case of Native American sites or slave dwellings, the structures can still be identified and studied through the darker outline of the dirt made by the foundations of the now non-existent building. Often, historic buildings that are existent are camouflaged under contemporary materials, which also serve to preserve the architectural treasure beneath. Because of the abundant supply of cedar, Tennessee has many historic middle-class dwellings ripe for identification and study. Also because Tennessee was very isolated in the colonial period and onward until the era of the railroad in the later 19th century, its older buildings reflect the folk ingenuity of very early settlers. The easiest way to identify the age of a building, according to the MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University Historic Preservation website, is by studying hardware. The study of nails, screws, door handles, and hinges, and windows, all of these can help identify the age of a building. Nails began by being wooden pegs and progressed to being metal and square in shape. Screws began as being large and with an unevenly spaced flat head shape. Door handles began as flat levers of wood or metal and progressed to a thin round handle of porcelain set in a square metal skeleton key box, sometimes with ornamentation. Hinges were not hidden between the door and the sill as we see them today. Rather, they were visible on the outer edge of the door and the outer edge of the door frame. Windows can be identified by the use of, if any, and the fewer number of panes of glass, possibly held in with small nails. The wavier the glass, the older it is, because glass is in fact a small, slow-moving liquid affected by gravity. Handmade glass also reveals bubbles and other imperfections. Another way of identifying an old building is by observing the size and configuration of the wood and stone materials used. The fastest and least labor-intensive way of making a foundation apart from building directly on ground level is by laying entire trees directly on stone columns. These logs also form the first layer of interlocking logs forming the basis of the single-room cabin known as a pen, P-E-N. Between the logs, a mortar or daub mixture was placed, which needed almost constant maintenance. Because of this maintenance, external shingles or boards were often placed over the logs as soon as possible. The logs also formed a kind of ladder, making it possible to maintain the roof, which was made of boards covered with wood shingles. Square blocks of a softer porous stone such as limestone were preferred for the fireplace. A more luxurious cabin was a 1.5-story pen. This provided a separate space for sleeping and weaving, as in weaving cloth. To conserve space, a unique staircase was formed, which can still be seen in places in Northern Europe today. This is a corner stair which rises on a sharp 90-degree curve, taking up no more than a few feet squared of living space at the base. This is the description of a colonial to early 19th century dwelling, which could be made by as few as 2 men and very few tools, just a couple of axes, a pulley, and a hammer. As resources became more plentiful in the mid-19th century, aesthetic preferences became within reach for middle-class Southerners. An additional pen would be built directly across from the first with its own chimney. The space between these pens was covered by a roof, and this was known as a dog trot. The dog trot was a space where the family could spend hot summer days in the shade enjoying the breeze. The entire configuration of 2 pens and a dog trot is known as a saddlebag. The newer pen would have characteristics associated with Greek Revival architecture, such as high ceilings of 10 to 12 feet and larger windows. Baseboard trim was a foot tall, and door trim was 4 inches in width. All of these features bespoke of the luxury of embellishment and the desire to entertain visitors in refined surroundings. Prior to or simultaneously with this new addition, a separate kitchen was built to the rear of the original cabin. By building the kitchen separately, the rest of the house was kept safe from heat and fire. The floor of the kitchen was made of cooler materials such as flat stones and brick. The fireplace of the kitchen was quite massive, revealing either the use of many laborers or slave laborers or some of both. Interestingly, the fireplace often had cubby holes built into wooden cabinets above and stone ones with a trap door down below the fireplace. The upper ones were for smoking meat in the smoke of the fire, and the lower one was for storing tuber vegetables. Tuber, as in root vegetables. To the side of the fireplace was often built a built-in metal cauldron in which to boil laundry with the heat of the kitchen fire. The kitchen was mostly open to the elements of the outside, but without a foundation and without daub or chinking to insulate the walls. The garbage of the home was tossed out of the kitchen, so just outside is the best place to look for artifacts revealing the lifestyle of the home's early inhabitants. The next step of the building process involved connecting the kitchen to the rest of the home, usually with a dining room with a connecting fireplace to warm the diners. The home's first private bedroom and the enclosing of the dog trot forming a hallway. All of these rooms incorporated a new method of building still used today known as frame architecture. This method required more precise tools, milled lumber, less wood, and allowed for some amount of insulation within the walls and ceiling. Because the dog trot had been enclosed for a hallway, a porch was often added to the front of the home and sometimes also to the rear. These porches and the advance of milled lumber and tools allowed for ornamental trim in the Italianate, Gothic, or Greek dental molding styles. The use of these influences bespoke of contact with the outside world apart from rural backwoods living. These embellishments are directly related to technological advantages such as the steam-powered mill, the railroad, and a national postal service. Of course, other technologies became available for the home as well. When plumbing, gas, and electricity became available, space within the home was required to add bathrooms, and fireplaces were no longer as necessary. Around the turn of the century, external additions to the home were not as fashionable as they are today, so space was at a premium within the home, and the hallway was often the space of choice to install a bathroom. This required doors which led from room to room in what is now known as a railway car or shotgun configuration, so named because a gun could be fired from the front of the home all the way through to the back without obstacle. Some homes staggered the doorways, believing that this would confuse negative spirits who could not circumnavigate straight through the home. These doorways also led themselves to ventilation in the heat of summer, a reason why many southern homes have two front doors. With gas and electricity becoming available, the home's fireplace were often encased in side walls, or the chimney was left standing while the fireplace itself was taken out altogether. Early electrical features in middle-class homes often amounted to a single bulb in the middle of the room in a plain porcelain fixture. For additional insulation and decoration, newspaper was pasted to the walls and covered with wallpapers, usually of a silver or blue-green striped or floral print, sprinkled with mica for sparkle. A couple of decades later, drywall became affordable and covered these panels' walls. These homes can be seen today, but many people aren't aware of what they are looking at when they see them. Why are so many historic buildings under the radar? Many of the log cabins have been covered with wood paneling and then covered with vinyl siding. Many of these homes are suspiciously cold, having lost the daubing between the logs and having very little or no insulating fibers. This and other peculiarities of historic homes ensure that only the very dedicated know the enjoyment of discovering a hidden treasure of American architecture. Of the examples to be found in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, around half of the exquisite examples were leveled and can now only be found in the Daily Rutherford archives and the books of local lore. The restoration of a historic building is not only an interesting riddle to be explored, it is also a cost-effective option, requiring half the money of building a brand new building, according to many sources. And in epilogue, I'm going to say that in my house, I found shoes, which are supposed to bring people good luck. Very ancient shoes, and someone's little packed lunch in a handkerchief, some corn cobs and so on, and they were all shoved into around the walls in the chinking, and around fireplaces and so forth. So that's my own little epilogue about that house and the exploration therein. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it very much, and I hope that you found this little architecture paper somewhat interesting. Thanks so much, and you learned some new things today. I remembered some new things today that I'd forgotten, and it's been a pleasure to read it for you. Very much appreciate your support. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing these videos. Very kind. And take care. Have a wonderful day.